What if the computer that could cure diseases, redesign materials, and change the world could also unlock the secrets inside your emails, your bank account, and your entire digital life? That is the quiet storm inside Microsoft right now, and it is why the company is changing Windows, before the real danger has fully arrived. And before we go deeper, hit like, subscribe, and share this with the one person who loves future tech before the rest of the world catches up. For years, quantum computing sounded like one of those ideas that always lived 5 or 10 years away. It felt important, but not urgent. It felt impressive, but also distant. Something for physicists, not normal people. Something happening in a lab, not something that could affect the laptop on your desk, the phone in your hand, or the files sitting in your company's cloud storage. That illusion is starting to break, because Microsoft is now doing two things at the same time, and when you place them side by side, the message becomes impossible to ignore. On one side, the company is pushing one of the boldest quantum hardware bets in the industry. On the other side, it is already changing the security foundation of Windows and other Microsoft platforms so they can survive a future where quantum machines become powerful enough to break the cryptography we rely on today. And that is why this story matters. This is not just a story about a new chip. It is not just a story about physics. It is not even just a story about Microsoft. It is really a story about a huge shift that is slowly moving from theory to infrastructure. And when a company as big as Microsoft starts acting like that shift is real, the rest of us should probably pay attention. To understand why, we need to start with a simple question. Why are people so worried about quantum computers in the first place? Right now, much of the digital world is protected by encryption. That sounds abstract, but it is everywhere. Encryption protects your messages, your saved passwords, your business files, your online banking, your medical records, and huge parts of government communication. It is one of the invisible systems that makes modern life possible. Most current encryption works because certain math problems are extremely hard for normal computers to solve. A classical computer can still solve them in theory, but the time required would often be so absurdly large that it becomes useless. In many cases, it could take longer than human civilization has existed. The difficulty is the lock, but quantum computing changes the kind of machine that is trying to pick that lock. A powerful enough quantum computer could run algorithms that attack some of those math problems far more efficiently than today's machines. The famous example is Shor's algorithm. If a quantum computer ever becomes stable and large enough to run it at the right scale, many of the cryptographic systems that protect the internet today would no longer look safe in the same way. And here's the part that makes this issue feel less like science fiction and more like strategy. Attackers do not need that machine today. They can steal encrypted data now and save it for later. This threat has a chilling name. Harvest now, decrypt later. The idea is simple. If a government intelligence service or a well-funded attacker can capture valuable encrypted data today, they may not be able to read it right now. But if that data still matters years from now, they can store it and wait for better quantum machines in the future. So the danger is not just about tomorrow's secrets. It is also about today's secrets with a long shelf life. Think about diplomatic cables, defense planning, financial records, legal archives, private research, identity systems, health data, or corporate strategy documents. A lot of information remains valuable for many years, in some cases, for decades. That means the clock does not start when quantum computers become strong enough. The clock may have started already. This is the backdrop for everything Microsoft is doing. Now let's talk about the dramatic half of the story first, the hardware. In early 2025, Microsoft revealed a chip called Majorana 1. And this was not a normal product announcement. It was the kind of announcement that instantly split the room. Supporters saw a possible leap toward practical quantum computing. Critics saw another bold promise in a field already crowded with hype. Microsoft described Majorana 1 as the first quantum processor built around topological qubits. That sounds technical, so let's make it simple. Most quantum computers today are powerful in theory, but painfully fragile in practice. Their qubits are delicate. Tiny disturbances from the environment can damage the quantum state. That creates errors. And error correction is one of the hardest problems in the entire field. Microsoft's bet is that there may be a smarter path. Instead of building a quantum machine around the same kind of fragile qubits many others are using, Microsoft spent years chasing something more unusual. The company built its approach around exotic physical behavior linked to Majorana zero modes, and a new materials design it has called a topoconductor. The basic dream is this. If you can store quantum information in a more naturally protected way, you may need far less error correction later. And if you need less correction, then building a useful machine becomes far more realistic. That is the promise behind the topological idea. Not easier science, easier scaling. Microsoft's long-term vision is enormous. The company has talked about a path toward fitting 1 million qubits onto a single chip design. That kind of number matters. because a quantum computer does not become world-changing just because it has a few qubits doing something clever in a lab. It becomes world-changing when it can scale into a machine big enough, stable enough, and fault-tolerant enough to solve problems that normal computers cannot touch. And Microsoft is not presenting this as some century-long moonshot. The company has been speaking in a much more aggressive way, saying it believes it can move toward a fault-tolerant prototype in years, not decades. That is the exciting version of the story. Now here is the uncomfortable version. Many people in the physics world are not fully convinced, and that skepticism is not random. It comes from the fact that Microsoft's approach is one of the most ambitious and one of the hardest to prove. It is incredibly difficult to show that what you are seeing is truly the topological state you claim, and not a signal that only looks similar under certain conditions. That has kept Microsoft under serious scrutiny for years. Some outside researchers have challenged earlier interpretations tied to the company's topological program. Critics have argued that certain past evidence was not strong enough, or that the measurements were not as decisive as Microsoft suggested. Microsoft has pushed back and defended its work, but the debate never fully disappeared. And that matters for one big reason. In quantum computing, the difference between interesting and real is everything. A beautiful theory is not enough. A promising graph is not enough. A bold press release is not enough. At some point, the field wants replication, independent validation, and evidence that survives hostile scrutiny. So when Microsoft made its next move in 2026, the stakes got even higher. At its build event in 2026, Microsoft introduced Majorana 2, and this announcement came with a claim designed to get everyone's attention. The company said the new chip delivered qubits that were around 1,000 times more reliable than the previous generation. It said mean qubit lifetime had reached about 20 seconds, with some cases lasting as long as a minute. In a world where many quantum systems measure qubit stability in tiny fractions of a second, that is the kind of leap that makes people sit up. Microsoft said this improvement came from major changes in materials and design. One of the most eye-catching details was the move from aluminum to lead in the superconducting stack. Lead is better known to most people as a shielding material, but here Microsoft used it as part of an effort to better protect delicate quantum states from disturbances. The company also said it improved the topological gap, essentially strengthening the conditions that help protect the qubit from noise. And then there was another twist. Microsoft said AI had helped speed parts of this work, not by magically inventing quantum physics, but by helping teams manage experiments, analyze huge amounts of data, refine fabrication, spot hidden problems, and search for better pathways faster. In other words, one frontier technology was being used to accelerate another. That is a powerful image. AI helping Microsoft build the machines that may define the next era after classical computing. But again, the real question is not whether the claim sounds exciting. The real question is whether it holds up. Because if those reliability numbers stand after deeper scrutiny, Microsoft's strange 2-decade bet suddenly starts looking less like a science gamble and more like a serious roadmap. But if those claims weaken under independent review, then the story changes fast. It becomes another warning about a field where hope can outrun proof. Quick pause. If you enjoy videos that turn confusing tech into clear stories, hit subscribe, leave a like, and send this video to someone who still thinks quantum is just movie talk. And yet, even if you remain skeptical about Microsoft's chip, there is another part of this story that is much harder to dismiss, because Microsoft is not only trying to build the quantum future, it is also preparing for the damage that quantum success could cause. That is where Windows enters the story. Most people hear quantum computing and imagine a completely separate world from everyday software. A research lab over here, your PC over there. But Microsoft clearly does not see it that way anymore. The company has already been adding post-quantum cryptography to core pieces of its ecosystem. And that phrase matters, so let's break it down. Post-quantum cryptography means new cryptographic methods designed to remain secure even if attackers eventually get access to powerful quantum computers. These methods do not rely on the same vulnerable math foundations as some of the public key systems widely used today. In late 2024, Microsoft added important post-quantum algorithms into SymCrypt, its core cryptographic library. That sounds boring until you realize what SymCrypt touches. It is part of the security plumbing behind Windows, Azure, Microsoft 365, Windows Server, and other Microsoft platforms. In other words, this is not a toy experiment, it is the foundation layer. Then, in 2025, Microsoft moved further. Post-quantum cryptography APIs became generally available in Windows 11, Windows Server 2025, and .NET at 10. That means this was no longer just early groundwork hidden in an internal library. It was becoming part of the tools developers and enterprises can actually use. Two of the big names here are ML-Chem and ML-DSA. You do not need to memorize those names. What matters is what they represent. They are part of the new generation of algorithms being used to prepare software for a world where traditional approaches may no longer be enough. MLChem is about secure key exchange. MLDSA is about digital signatures and identity verification. Together, they point to a basic truth. This transition is not one small patch. It touches multiple layers of trust, and Microsoft is not doing this in the most reckless way possible. The company has been pushing what it often describes as hybrid or composite cryptography. That means using classical and post-quantum methods together rather than instantly throwing away the old world and replacing it in one giant move. Think of it like reinforcing a bridge while people are still driving across it. You do not blow it up and hope the new one appears by morning. You build carefully. You overlap systems. You create flexibility. You reduce the chance that one unexpected failure brings the whole thing down. That bigger strategy is often described with another phrase, crypto agility. And that phrase is more important than it sounds. Crypto agility means designing systems so their cryptographic parts can evolve without the entire platform collapsing into chaos. Because nobody serious thinks this transition will happen once and then be finished forever. Standards will change. Performance trade-offs will matter. Some algorithms will age better than others. Some will need replacement. The companies that survive this era are the ones building systems that can adapt. That is exactly why Microsoft's behavior is so revealing. The company is acting as if post-quantum security is not a future upgrade. It is an architectural era. And once you see that, the title of this video makes more sense. Microsoft is basically admitting that quantum is important enough that even Windows, one of the biggest software platforms on Earth, has to start changing now. This is not fear for drama. It is math meeting policy, engineering, and business reality, because the migration itself may take years. That point gets lost in a lot of public conversation. People imagine that if a big quantum breakthrough happens one day, companies can simply release a patch the next week and move on. Real infrastructure does not work like that. Large organizations rely on layers of cryptographic systems spread across devices, cloud services, and certificates. They rely on software signing, identity systems, hardware modules, old applications, and custom tools nobody wants to touch, because they still somehow keep the company alive. Now imagine trying to replace the trust model inside all of that. Not after a crisis. Before the crisis. That is the real challenge. Microsoft has openly described the move to quantum-safe systems as a multi-year transition. And honestly, that makes sense. If an enterprise wants to prepare properly, it first has to discover where public key cryptography is being used. Then it has to rank which systems protect the most sensitive, long-lived data. Then it has to test new approaches in safe environments. Then it has to worry about compatibility, performance, procurement, governance, and compliance. This is not glamorous work, but it is the work that decides whether a future shock becomes manageable or catastrophic. And there is a business reason Microsoft cannot afford to be late. Think about who depends on Microsoft. Governments, banks, hospitals, large corporations, cloud customers, developers, schools, critical infrastructure. If trust in Microsoft's platforms cracks, the damage would not be small or local. It would hit the company's reputation, its enterprise relationships, and its position in the cloud war all at once. So preparing early is not just smart engineering, it is self-defense. It is also competitive strategy. Because whoever helps customers through this transition with the least pain gains trust. And in technology, trust turns into contracts. Now, Microsoft has also attached public timing to this broader shift. The company's quantum-safe roadmap aims for an initial protection phase by the end of the decade and a wider transition of products and services by 2033. That is earlier than some of the deadlines being discussed by major government bodies. In the United Kingdom, the National Cybersecurity Center has pointed to 2035 as an important target for full migration. In the United States, rules tied to national security products have been pushing some requirements much earlier, so companies like Microsoft are being pulled by multiple clocks at once. And that is another reason this story feels real. Governments are not talking about quantum-safe migration like a philosophy seminar anymore. They're giving timelines. Developers are being pulled into this transition too. With post-quantum support arriving in .NET 10 and other Microsoft tools, the company is trying to make the next generation of security easier to adopt. That matters more than many viewers may realize, because new standards only spread fast when they become convenient. If using a safer, future-ready method requires a painful custom setup, many teams delay it. If it is built into the framework they already trust, adoption becomes much more likely. That is how real platform power works. Not just by inventing technology, but by making large ecosystems move together. And if you are wondering what this means for regular people right now, the answer is subtle but important. You probably will not wake up tomorrow and see a big glowing message on your screen saying, "Quantum protection enabled." Most of these changes will arrive quietly. They will show up in updates, APIs, certificates, libraries, cloud settings, and developer tools. They show up in background security layers that normal users never touch directly. But that does not make them less important. In fact, it makes them more important. The strongest security upgrades are usually the ones that happen before panic starts. Think about it this way. When an operating system changes how trust works under the hood, it can affect everything built on top of it. Browsers, enterprise login systems, secure email, software updates, remote access, signed applications, and cloud identity all depend on those trust layers. Document protection and connections between devices also depend on them. If those layers become more resilient, the benefit spreads outward. And if companies wait too long to upgrade them, the risk spreads outward too. That is why this story is not only for quantum researchers or cybersecurity experts. It matters for business leaders making long-term decisions, for developers choosing tools, and for IT teams planning migration paths. It even matters for ordinary users trying to understand where digital trust is heading next. Because once the foundations start changing, eventually the whole building follows. And timing matters. The organizations that begin early get room to test, adjust, and recover from mistakes. The organizations that begin late usually migrate under pressure, and pressured security decisions are rarely the best ones. That is the hidden drama in this entire transition. The real winners may not be the ones with the loudest headlines. They may be the ones quietly preparing before the clock gets loud. One small mission before we finish this. If this breakdown is helping you see the future more clearly, support the channel with a like and subscribe. Share this with your smartest group chat. There's also a deeper irony in all of this, and it might be the most interesting part of the story. Microsoft is racing to build the kind of machine that could help break the old cryptographic world. At the exact same time, it is racing to protect its products from that world breaking. That is not hypocrisy. That is what a real platform company does when it sees a transition early enough. It tries to win the upside while reducing the downside. If Microsoft's topological approach works, it could become one of the defining companies of the quantum age. If a rival gets there first, Microsoft still wants Windows, Azure, and its broader software stack to remain trusted when that day comes. It is a hedge, but it is also more than that. It is a signal. A company with Microsoft's scale does not rework core security layers just because it wants good headlines. That kind of move takes money, engineering time, management attention, and institutional belief. And when that much institutional belief piles into one direction, you should notice. Still, let's keep one foot on the ground. Quantum computers are not about to melt your password manager next Tuesday. That part is important. Today's machines are still far away from the scale needed to break widely used real-world cryptography in practice. The jump from exciting prototypes to cryptographically dangerous systems is huge. It is not just about making qubits. It is about making many qubits stable, controllable, connected, and correctable at scale. That is why the timing debate still matters so much. Maybe the true quantum threat arrives faster than many expect. Maybe it arrives later. Maybe Microsoft's topological path wins. Maybe it does not. Maybe another company using a different architecture gets there first. But notice what has already changed. The conversation inside serious institutions is no longer if this matters. It is, how early do we need to move? That is a very different world, and you can see it in the details. Microsoft has been extending post-quantum work into certificate systems, like Active Directory certificate services, because identity is core to computing. The company has also been thinking about hybrid modes, hardware-backed keys, cloud services, firmware, signing, and authentication. They are looking at the long chain of systems that all have to keep working together. That is what makes this story bigger than one headline about one quantum chip. It is about the slow replacement of assumptions. For decades, the digital world grew around the idea that certain cryptographic foundations were safe enough to build on. Now the largest technology companies are planning for a time when some of those foundations may no longer be enough. And they're doing it before most people can even explain why. That is how major technological eras often begin, not with one cinematic moment, but with powerful institutions quietly changing their defaults. And there is something else worth understanding here. Quantum computing is often sold to the public through wonder. People talk about miracle drugs, new materials, cleaner energy, optimized logistics, and discoveries that would take forever. Those possibilities are real reasons for excitement. But the first massive effects of a technology are not always the glamorous ones. Sometimes the first serious effect is pressure. Pressure on standards, pressure on infrastructure, pressure on trust, pressure on companies to prepare before consumers even realize there is a problem. That may be what we are seeing right now. Microsoft's behavior tells us something important. The company seems to believe that waiting for perfect certainty would be the bigger mistake. It would rather start adapting now, while the future is still blurry, than gamble that the future will arrive too late to hurt. And from Microsoft's point of view, that logic is hard to argue with. If quantum progress stalls, the company still ends up with more modern, more agile cryptographic systems. That is not a wasted outcome. If quantum progress accelerates, Microsoft looks prepared while others scramble. That is an asymmetric bet, and those are often the smartest ones. There's also a human lesson hidden inside this. We tend to think that the future arrives when a product reaches consumers, but in reality, the future often arrives much earlier inside roadmaps, standards meetings, and engineering decisions. By the time ordinary users feel the change, big players have often been preparing for years. That is exactly what makes this moment so fascinating. Windows is not becoming quantum safe because the public demanded it. Windows is changing because Microsoft can already see the shape of a world that most people still treat as distant. And when one of the biggest software companies on Earth starts redesigning trust itself around that future, it is worth asking what else is about to change. Will banks move faster? Will governments harden their systems sooner? Will cloud customers start treating readiness as a buying requirement? Will software teams begin choosing tools based on how easily they can migrate later? Those questions sound niche now. In a few years, they may sound obvious. That is how paradigm shifts happen. First they look academic, then they look strategic, then suddenly they look necessary. Microsoft appears to be somewhere between stage 2 and stage 3. And that is why this story matters more than many people realize. The biggest clue is not the marketing language. It is not the flashy chip photo. It is not even the most dramatic number in the announcement. The biggest clue is behavior. Microsoft is behaving like quantum matters. It is behaving like the security model of the old internet has an expiration date. It is behaving like operating systems, developer tools, and cloud platforms all need to evolve before the emergency arrives. That is a serious admission. And maybe the title says it best. Microsoft just admitted quantum is the future because even Windows cannot ignore it anymore. Not because your home PC is about to be attacked by a sci-fi machine tomorrow morning, but because the companies responsible for the digital world are already making decisions, as if that future is coming. They are laying the tracks now. They are hardening the locks now. They are rewriting the rules now. And if Microsoft is right, then one day we may look back on this period as a turning point. The moment quantum stopped being a lab story and became an infrastructure story, the moment the world's biggest software systems quietly turned to face a threat and an opportunity that most people still could not see. And that is what makes this more than a tech update. It is an early warning. It is a strategic confession. And it may be the clearest sign yet that the next computing era is no longer waiting outside the door. It is already in the building. If you want to be early, not late, stay close to this story. Because when the operating system millions of people depend on starts preparing for quantum, the future is no longer theoretical. It is already being installed, one quiet update at a time.